Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to a Singapore-only episode of Not Another Digital Marketing Podcast. I'm joined in our lovely, ramshackle, makeshift DIY studio by Miss Sarah Quay. How are you, Sarah?
I'm good, but I'm a little bit nervous to talk about what we're going to discuss today.
Why should you be nervous? Why should you be nervous? There's no reason to be nervous unless you're scared that you're going to get cancelled. Is that why?
Maybe. A little bit. Yeah, I am actually just a little bit nervous about getting cancelled.
Well, cancel culture, right? I mean, if those of you who haven't cottoned on yet to what we're going to be talking about today, it is actually cancel culture. And it's to say that it has taken the internet by storm in a day and age where someone like the former President Trump exists is probably a bit of a stretch. However, it has been something that's been dominating at least some of the internet airwaves over the last few years, right? What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah.
Would that be a fair assessment of the situation?
I think so, especially, with social media and people just influencing other people. It's interesting to see how, there's this culture that's born out of ideas that don't really resonate with a certain group of people, and they tend to influence others as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to tell everyone what exactly cancel culture is?
I would leave that up to you because I know you love the sound of your own voice far better than I do.
I do, though.
Yeah, you do. You absolutely 100%
yeah, I really do.
But okay, what do you understand to be cancel culture?
I think ultimately, and I have to really thank our content writer Vaishnavi for this, who has defined it so well. And she has said that cancel culture can be encapsulated in just two words, mainly vigilant boycotting. So
vigilante boycotting.
Yeah, vigilante boycotting.
Okay,
yeah, that's
yeah.
right. So ultimately, the idea of cancel culture is to bring justice and accountability of people who may have otherwise been immune to the consequences of their unethical actions. And just for an example, things like the #MeToo movement, which I think it was last year, right? That it was pretty big on Twitter. Was it last year?
Was it only last year or was it in 2019? Because I felt like last year still hasn't ended.
Oh yeah, I still feel,
it kind of feels like we're in 2020 part 2 right now.
Yeah,
right?
feels that way.
Yeah, I think on the surface of it, it's supposed to be a good thing, right? And I think Vaish's definition of it, or the one that she shared with us, right? Because by the way, little bit of a segue. Vaish conceptualized this whole episode, so props to her. Awesome, Vaish, we love you. Okay. Yeah. So, this the definition of it being vigilante boycotting, right, is accurate because vigilantes could either be seen in a good way or a bad way, right? And depending on who the person, or the brand or the person that's being cancelled, you could either think it's a bad thing or a good thing, right? And if it's if you agree with it personally, you would say it's proactive boycotting. If you disagree with it, then what was the phrase that I used earlier? If you disagree with it, basically it's what was the phrase? Bullying? Ostracizing? Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I had a phrase for it, and I just said it just like 30 seconds ago, but I don't remember it now. But basically, it's it really depends on where you fall, with regards to whether or not you support or are against that particular entity that's being cancelled, about whether or not it's a good thing, right? And it's started off as a social advocacy tool, right? A form of activism online where people could actually, have some sort of effect on either brands or people or individuals or celebrities, right? So that these people are supposedly held accountable, right? But in some cases, it seems like it might have gone a little bit too far.
Yeah, I feel like some people they do take it a little bit too far, like maybe just one toe out of line. Because I am all for standing by your beliefs and for wanting to make positive change, but at the same time, I think that some instances involving even physical violence against like a perpetrator, I think to me that's kind of taking things a little bit too far.
Yeah.
Yeah, but where do you draw the line in regards to this anyway.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, which then leads us actually into the segue of, where we talk about the consequences of cancel culture, right? And the slight tangent of freedom of speech here, right? Because, ordinarily, okay, not to say ordinarily, that's a very loaded way of saying it, but freedom of speech means different things to different people, right? And, we understand that in a society, in a free and fair society, freedom of speech means that you should be able to say anything you want so long as it doesn't perpetrate harm upon another person, right? And so we would like to consider that particular discussion in the context of cancel culture as that should people have their freedom of speech taken away just because you disagree with them, because they're canceled, right? I think that's a worthwhile question to ask, right? And, gosh, I feel I'm going to say this word so many times, cancel culture. I'll just say it like this, like, do these people deserve to have, do they deserve consequences? Is that the right word? No. Do they deserve to be punished? Yes, that's the right word, right?
Okay.
Do they deserve to be punished for stuff that they said that was, might be considered offensive or to some people, but not offensive to others, and should people then dogpile on them when that happens, right? So what's your take on that? Like, where does the line end between like freedom of speech versus freedom of consequence in that case?
Well, that's a really loaded question, but I feel like to each his own. But for me, I am willing to forgive somebody who has made a mistake, who has owned up to it and is actively trying to repent and right his wrongs. So I feel like that...
Repent.
Yeah, repent. Yeah, so with that in mind, I think I'm a true believer that everybody deserves a second chance. But at the same time, you also have people who have been cancelled but are not willing to admit their faults. Instead, some of them just sweep it under the rug. Yeah, or even worse, like I think some of them stand by what they say and even...
they double down.
Yeah, they fire back against their, their haters in that sense, or their critics.
Yeah.
So I think one example we can probably share is, you are aware that Victoria's Secret had experienced a massive fall in sales around like 2019.
I mean, yeah, I haven't shopped there in a while. I couldn't find my size, honestly, and it was so problematic. But then I think, that was part of something that happened to them, right? Because these are not the circles that I swim in.
Yeah,
so,
clearly.
Right?
Yeah,
why don't you tell us a bit more about that then?
Yeah, so actually, Victoria's Secret did experience a very severe decline in sales around 2018 to 2019, because there was apparently a lack of sizes for plus size bodies as well as transgender.
Plus size. No wonder I stopped shopping there. That explains it, like the lace, and everything. It just, they couldn't get me the right size. Plus size, definitely. I'm definitely plus size, yeah.
Yeah, well, moving on. Their chief marketing officer mentioned in a source that says he did not want to include plus size models or transgenders in their Victoria's Secret fashion shows, and they didn't want to produce these items because he quote unquote this show is a fantasy unquote. So the issue with this is that I feel like it kind of excludes other normal types of bodies and kind of narrows our way of thinking. And well, I can kind of see why, some people might be a little bit hurt by this, because it's a bit depressing to know that, my body size is not up to societal standards.
Or at the very least, like what Victoria's Secret's ideas of a standard should be, right? And so what happened to them after that?
It seems like...
Well, yeah, I mean, the sales were probably a good consequence of that, right, as well. And then, was there any online outrage, like an actual...
It seems like they have gotten some, I would say, feedback from even, other... this Australian model called Robin Lawley, I think that's how you pronounce her second name, her last name. So she says, you see through the bull, beep. When you get older, they have power. They should be setting the example on diversity. And I think this kind of, also begs the question about whether brands should be held accountable and responsible for the impact of their marketing strategies. Yeah. Well, we can see this for another, episode, another podcast.
We've got so many things we want to do for another episode. Okay, so that's like, a brand that got, not to say cancel, but people just left them, right? They stopped buying their stuff. And I think I vaguely recall seeing a little bit of an online backlash about this. Again, these are not the circles. These are not the troubled waters that I usually swim in. So I might not be necessarily an expert on this sort of thing. But I do recall there was a brand that did something quite different.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, okay, I probably would be able to find my size there, right?
Yeah, and that is actually
y'all
savage.
can't see this, but Vaish is like giving me major side eye right now because she's off camera and this is her episode and she's here and she's like, oh my god, I didn't sign up for this. But yeah, Rihanna.
Yeah, Savage x FENTY by Rihanna actually. They have a broader range of sizes that caters to different body types, which I thought was, it gave people more options to choose from. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, and that's probably an example of a brand that definitely or probably won't be cancelled anytime soon.
I hope not.
Yeah.
They have really nice things.
Yeah. But then you see, this is like, we talk about the good things here in terms of like how it can force brands to, look at their diversity or whether or not they're being inclusive and whatnot, right? But then we also touched a little bit earlier on about like the bad things that could happen, right? And when you have cancel culture or vigilante boycotting, right? Good or bad, it almost seems like there's no real, there's no acceptable standard of what is acceptable cancel culture and what is unacceptable cancel culture, right? And that's sort of like, giving birth to a monster that you can't control.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of like whether anyone has actually defined what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable.
I don't think anyone has done that yet.
Right? And I think that's a problem though, because like, we have freedom of speech laws which clearly lay out like, what speech is acceptable and what isn't, right? But then there's no one, I highly doubt governments around the world are going to be like defining what cancel culture should or should not be in legislation, right? So that leaves it up to the internet mob to sort of define what cancel culture is supposed to be. So in that case, you might have situations, or actually there probably have been situations where you overinflate, what seems to be minor issues, irrelevant issues, or even just mistakes from, years ago, right? And then that person gets cancelled, and the internet then dogpiles on them. And, like just for something that on the surface of it might seem relatively minor, right? And like, how do we even like begin to define what's acceptable and what isn't in this particular space?
I don't think we can, honestly, because the issue is kind of like a non-issue such that there aren't any proper laws to control cancel culture. I mean, sure, you have laws that control things like doxing and harassment also, which props to our law enforcers. But I think that cancel culture hasn't been too big of an issue to a point that we need laws at the moment. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, okay, so I don't think it's really happened anywhere to a major degree compared to, say, the US, for example, right? Where I think, I'm thinking of Terry Crews, who put out a tweet that was interesting because, I say interesting because I'm not white, I'm not black either, but he talked about how if we're not careful around the conversation between white supremacy, we might create black supremacy instead. Okay. And Black Twitter just said, oh no, Terry Crews is cancelled. And there was so much dogpiling that went on Terry Crews. Now, he's said some problematic things before in the past, and people just looked at that as an excuse to just like pile on him even more. Whereas if you were to parse what he said, it sort of like makes sense. You don't want to replace one kind of racial supremacy with another. On the surface of it, it's fine. But in the context of like, the search for social justice in the US at that moment in time, it might have seemed a little bit tone deaf, so to speak. But he got cancelled for that, quite severely, I might add. He lost hundreds of thousands of followers and whatnot. But like, I guess that's the bad side of it. It's like, because we don't have an acceptable standard of what is, we don't have a standard in terms of like what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable in cancel culture, right? So I guess until we as a society, global or otherwise, can actually come together and define that, we're never ever gonna get away from this particular problem.
I don't think so. In fact, I feel like this idea of cancel culture, it also kind of brings up this argument of like logic versus groupthink. Because I mean, using the Terry Crews example, if people weren't really like retweeting stuff about Terry Crews, I don't think it would have been as widespread as it was. But at the same time, you have to bear in mind that whatever you see on the internet, even if it is, I don't know, like a news article, you have to bear in mind that it was written based on somebody's perception on things. You know, like the way words are being written, I think they can imply different messages, and they can be consumed in different ways. And also one thing I think is very important to bring up is how if I don't choose to support, you know, a group that is cancelling a person, I am considered being on that perpetrator's side.
So the argument that if you're neutral, then if you choose neutrality, then you are against the person that is advocating for a certain position.
Yeah,
right?
and I feel like that's problematic because like not all the worldly problems will directly affect me. It's not to say that I don't empathize, but there is literally nothing I can do about it. You know?
Yeah, so you know, when are you gonna join my charity? You know that seeks to make sure that all turtles in the world have like snow hats or Christmas hats.
Yeah, and I mean,
you see, you're not joining my group, so I'm just gonna assume that you are anti-turtle hat.
Yeah, that is cancel culture, right?
And I just feel like if you need to care about this a little bit more, Sarah, come on.
I don't even have money for lunch.
Unbelievable. Yeah, but all jokes aside, right? You bring up a very important point about the amount of, I think we have a finite amount of emotional capacity when it comes to these sorts of things, right? We can be outraged about only a certain number of things, and sometimes we can be outraged about just one thing in particular that we really, really care about, right? Rightly or wrongly, whether you should care about that thing. And I want to bring this up because Vice shared a very interesting case study with us about the really bad sides of cancel culture, right? Where people have very strong opinions about certain things, for sure. Yeah, we all do, right? But then what happens when that weight of emotion is then used against you? Like if you're so emotionally invested in something, right? What happens when there's a backlash to it, So the case that we're talking about here is that of Wilson Gavin, right? Who is a 21-year-old student who was protesting about a drag queen reading, books to children at a public library, okay? So this particular instance is, he's a 21-year-old student, and he's protesting this. He doesn't believe it should be happening, whatever, and stuff like that. And maybe he felt really strongly about it enough to actually say something, right? And whether or not you agree with his position, I think he has a right to express it, right? But here's the thing: the backlash that happened to him after that, right? Basically the full weight of the internet coming down, crashing on him, right? A 21-year-old kid. Well, I say kid. Dana is also still only 21, so
she's the baby.
Yeah. But like a 21-year-old young adult, right? Who has put out a position out there on the internet to be so thoroughly bullied and shamed and criticized for it to the point where, I'm not sure if those of you that don't know the story, Wilson actually committed suicide, right? And he was cancelled so horribly to the point that he felt the only way out was for him to actually commit suicide, right? And this is just like an encapsulation of like how, like how cancel culture, because we don't have standards for what's acceptable, what's unacceptable, we have the situation where it ends up claiming an actual person's life.
Yeah, and right? I do have another example that literally just came to my head. Do you remember the game Flappy Bird?
Flappy Bird? I vaguely do. I'm a bit old. I don't always remember these things. But yeah, I think I remember Flappy Bird.
Yeah, well, I did remember that it was a very frustrating game to play, to say the least. But I was very taken aback.
Maybe because you just weren't good at it.
Well, I was trying my best, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, not everyone's good at everything like you, Rafie.
No. I don't even play games. What are you talking about?
Sure you don't.
Yeah, but go on.
Yeah, moving on. Well, the Flappy Bird creator actually got tons of death threats, I think, because a lot of people were getting so frustrated by his game. And even something as small as a difficult game to play can get you into trouble.
Yeah.
So I think it's very telling of like how sometimes, when you're emotional, some people, are not capable of rationality when they're emotional.
Yeah.
So I think that's an issue.
Yeah.
That's an issue too, along with groupthink.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like, how many of us have made really bad purchasing decisions when we're upset?
Me!
I just bought myself a pair of football boots yesterday and I was like, I don't need these. I already have so many at home. But then because I was feeling grumpy and moody, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah.
It's okay. I mean, there was once I actually booked a trip to Korea with my friend just because I was going through a very difficult time.
Okay. Well, no, I think that one, it's understandable, right? But at the very least, at that moment in time when you were feeling emotionally drained and whatnot, you didn't try and cancel anything.
Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah. But then you see, not everybody is going to be able to have that clarity of thought in that particular moment in time, right? And speaking of clarity of thought, you know who needs to have clarity of thought whenever they're faced with the prospect of cancel culture? Brands, obviously. This is a marketing podcast after all, right? So, let's talk about that in the context of brands, right? I think we touched a little bit, touched on it a little bit earlier when we talked about, say, Victoria's Secret and a couple of, and how companies react to these sorts of things, right? But let's ask ourselves some very, very simple questions, right? How do you think a brand should deal with cancel culture?
Wow, that's a very big and broad question.
You want to save it for another episode or cancel culture episode part 2?
Well, I can
summarize. We'll get Vaish to appear on that one, right? Yeah, Vaish,
yeah. She's really excited right now, right?
Oh, she is so excited, yeah. Your name is written in the stars, Vaish.
Well, yeah, I mean to answer your question, I think we can spend hours talking about this, but I think just to summarize, I think brands first have to understand what exactly the issue is. Like whether or not they think they should apologize for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, even though you might have a mob of people going after you, if you stand by your actions, I don't think you really need to apologize if your conscience is clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even in that situation, if you do get cancelled, it's sort of like, I suppose you're being boycotted for doing the right thing in your view, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think, I'd like to bring up Nike here, actually, because, when they supported Colin Kaepernick, right, throughout his social justice campaign, certain elements of US society were like, oh, no, this ain't right. They deserve to be cancelled for, not respecting certain cultural norms that were sacred to that particular segment of society, right? However, they survived. Right? I mean, Nike's still around from what I know. Yeah, but and their message was that social justice is a matter that is important for everybody, right? Not just certain groups of society. And they stuck to it even though they were cancelled by a certain, certain segment of that particular society, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that's pursuant to what you were saying, that as long as your conscience is clear, if the brand is very clear about its values, then I don't think they should be worried about cancel culture.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, there's also the other side where you might unintentionally offend a particular group of people. And if that's the case, well, I mean, the first thing you should do is obviously to apologize. Because if I were to accidentally criticize your watch or something and you got upset, but my intentions weren't bad, I will still apologize because I feel like I didn't intend to hurt your feelings that way. And I think that a brand should own up to these mistakes. Actually, I want to correct something I said earlier. I don't think that you shouldn't apologize, period. But I think you should, if you're a brand and you are involved in, maybe a tricky situation, you might want to think about whether or not it was done purposefully, and whether or not there's anything you could have done to maybe change your messaging a little bit better. I think it's not so much about what you say per se, but it's how you say it. Yeah. And unfortunately, sometimes, things are taken negatively. Yeah.
I think also, I think we need to be very clear here when it comes to, whether or not something or someone or some company deserves or not to be cancelled, is that there's sometimes a divergence between intention and execution, right? You might not intend to offend somebody, but then you do something that does, right? And then you get cancelled for it. Own up, like you said, own up to the mistake. And then just promise to do better, right? Should brands be indefinitely cancelled just because they make those kinds of mistakes? I don't know, right? Because it really depends on... The short answer for me would be it depends. Yeah. The long answer would be it depends on the severity of the offense.
Yeah, and it also depends on whether or not they are willing to, accept their faults and maybe take corrective action from there. Yeah. Repent. That's what the pastor says.
Okay, fine. That's I suppose that's a good way of going about it. Own up to your mistakes. right? If there is a mistake, if somebody is offended by what you're doing, if you're clear about your brand values, you should just stick to them and sort of like, well, we're sorry you feel that way, but this is who we are, right? That kind of thing. And then just being very clear about your values and what you stand for, right? I think it's worse for brands who don't really know what they stand for, and then they make a complete mess of things. I think an example that comes to mind is Pepsi, when they did that whole ad with Kendall Jenner. You know, and it was just like, oh yeah, you know, you can solve world war and hunger and whatever. You can bring about world peace with an Instagram model and a can of Pepsi. Oh, that was a terrible message.
Yeah, it was. But at the same time, I do believe there is a big difference between ignorance and just straight up being offensive. And some people, unfortunately, in the world that we live in, sometimes we tend to be a bit ignorant, myself included. You know, and therefore, like, we say or do things that might.
No, really? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, go on.
I'm human too, Rafie.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Yeah. So what was I saying? Oh yes. Okay. So I think that like I said, there's a difference between ignorance and just being outrightly, just being a bully outright. And so therefore I feel like, you know, if you know it's an issue of ignorance, you should just apologize for it and then take corrective action from there. Whereas if you're a bully, then I think it's a different story altogether. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, if you are a bully, I suppose you're not a company that deserves to be followed anyway, right? I mean, there's a difference between being a bully and being sassy, right? I think Wendy's, for example, on Twitter, like, draws a very fine line between that, and they just about get it right most of the time, right? And then there are times when they've gone over it, you know. But yeah, so, you know, aside from trying not to be a brand that's a bully, right? What else do you think brands need to do to make sure that they don't get cancelled? For whatever reason. What do you think?
I feel like there's no really like preventive way for you to defend yourself against cancel culture. I mean, like, there's kind of two sides of the coin. You can either just do what you want and then put yourself at risk of getting cancelled, or you can just play it safe all the time. So I think that it's a matter of striking that balance there. Because, you know, I feel like both sides have their pros and cons. I mean, on one hand, like, you know, you can do everything right, go by the rules of the book, but yet it kind of restrains your creativity in a way.
Yeah. I do think, though, that there is one thing that we can suggest to brands that they should absolutely 100% should not do, right? And that is, you know, performative activism, right? Where it's like on social media or in their marketing, they're like, oh, we stand for this, we stand for that, blah, blah, blah. But they don't actually follow through with it, right? I think there's a statistic here that Vice also shared, that 56% of believe that too many brands use societal issues as a marketing ploy.
Yeah.
Right. And this obviously is just setting yourself up to be cancelled, you know, because if you're gonna, I remember I'm trying to think of an example here that won't set off an absolute storm in the comments.
Are you afraid of getting cancelled?
No, it's not that I'm afraid of getting cancelled, because, I've been cancelled so many times in my life. So
we'll never cancel you here.
It's okay. It's okay. I mean, you say that now, but that's fine. But I think there are situations where it's like where brands try to ride on certain trends, right? And I'm trying not to be too like specific here because it's all crazy.
Well, we can keep it generic then.
Okay, basically, if a social justice issue happens and you are not in agreement with that social justice issue, and then you issue a discount code on your website that is anti-social justice issue for 20% off, you are setting yourself up to be cancelled.
You're just bribing people.
Exactly. Yeah. You're like, we're going to show that we're on this side of this particular issue and we're going to try and make money off it. Right. And I just think brands, regardless of whether you support or are against certain things, really shouldn't be using social justice or even, any kind of social action as a means of, marketing. I think that's a pretty good piece of advice there. Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay. But if you are in the middle of all of this cancel culture stuff, I think we'll wrap this up with some pretty easy to digest tips and tricks dealing with cancel culture. Did I get that right, V? I think I did, yeah.
She's nodding her head.
Yes, she's nodding her head.
And she's smiling.
Yes, yeah. She's the silent superstar in the office. So,
but she'll join us one day here.
She will. I'm pretty sure she will, yeah. Okay, so tips and tricks for what to do if you are caught in the midst of a cancel culture action. What do you think? You want to kick off with this
Yeah,
one?
first things first.
Tip number 1.
Say sorry.
Okay. Yeah, that makes it up. You want to expand on that?
Well, I think it speaks for itself, but I've spoken about this like many times throughout the podcast, but just to summarize, I don't think anyone is inherently out to get another person. But sometimes you don't...
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
yeah.
I have to believe in people, okay, but...
I feel like I'm doing the Thor face where it's like, really?
Well, I would like to think so.
Okay.
Well, I think that always apologize if you have offended somebody, whether or not it was done with intention.
Okay.
Well, step 2.
Okay, so that's number 1.
Yeah.
Basically, own up to your mistakes. That's what you're saying, right? Okay, so my second tip is that you need to communicate very clearly and also, in the language that people can understand. There should be no ambiguity whatsoever in your communications. When you're caught in the middle of this kind of firestorm, like you have to be very clear what your messaging is. If you're going to apologize, be very clear about what you're apologizing for and why you're apologizing for it. I think that's a very good tip. Like, you'd be surprised at how many brands don't get the communication right. The intention might be there. Oh, we're going to say sorry for this, but if it's not worded correctly, if it doesn't address like the pain points of the people that you've offended, then it's almost worse than not apologizing at all.
It's like digging a deeper grave for yourself.
Yeah.
If you don't apologize, right?
Okay.
So third step.
Yeah. Tip number 3. I'll let you have this one. What's tip number 3?
Okay. Tip number 3 is to take corrective action or repent. Yeah, and because I feel like if you are sincere about your apology and you definitely want, well, I mean, all businesses exist to make money, right? If you want to retain your existing customers, I think it's important to recognize where you've gone wrong and make sure you don't make the same mistake again. Because I mean, if you do, it's gonna be a lot worse.
Yeah.
The monster's gonna get bigger.
Okay. Yeah. No. That's. I can agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how about any, no-fly zones? Well, number 1, I would say no bribery, no matter what.
But I would say also, like, if you get cancelled for performative social action, this is tip number 1. We're on number 4 or number 5?
Number 4.
We're on tip number 4. Okay. So tip number 4 is that if you are cancelled for performative social activism with your marketing, that basically means that you're not committing to anything, I think you should walk the talk in that situation. Like, if you have been accused of not being supportive of social justice causes that you performatively on social media claim to support, you actually have to then actually perform the activism or the charity work, donate to these charities, work with these organizations that you claim to support, actually walk the talk. I think that's a very good, very important tip as well.
Yeah.
Tip number 4. Yeah.
That's
All right. Do we, you know what? We'll round it up with one more tip from you, Sarah. Come on. Tip number 5. We've got 5 tips and tricks here. Go on.
But you said everything I wanted to say already.
Okay, so you want me to take number 5? Because I have one in mind.
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so basically, right, if you're caught in a storm and you're trying to figure out how to get out of it, listen to the people that you have upset, right? Hear them out, and then formulate your plan of action. You need to understand that if for example, if groups that are marginalized or groups that have been persecuted for any shape or form and you have somehow contributed to that, you need to listen to them and speak to them in their language. You can't just, again, this is linked to all of the other tips as well. Like, you need to really, really be very clear about your messaging and whatnot, but you can't be clear in your messaging, you can't be clear in your intentions, you won't know who you should donate to and whatnot unless you speak to the people that have cancelled you and try to understand where they're coming from. Okay, and I think that is possibly, more than anything, the most important tip that we could possibly offer anybody that gets involved in a cancel culture storm.
Well, hopefully this doesn't happen to anybody who's watching this.
Oh, sincerely hope not. And if it does happen to you and you need a remedy for it, please do get in touch with us here at First Page Digital. For us to, maybe we can help you through this particular situation. So we'll see.
V's trying to contain her laughter right but she's failing miserably.
I mean, it is the company podcast after all. You gotta say something about the company, right? So it's all good. Yeah. I guess let's all sum it up. Cancel culture, right?
It's not going away.
It's not going away anytime soon. Again, to really just define it in one phrase, Vice said it best. It's vigilante boycotting, right? It's not just boycotting, it's boycotting with a few more steps.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it is. And I guess we clearly don't have an acceptable standard for what is or what isn't cancel culture just yet. So while it's good that it exists in a way to hold brands and celebrities and
just
whoever,
people in
general accountable, there's still no clear line of where it should stop, and that's probably a problem that's going to be with us for a while yet. And last but not least, there are steps that you can take, to remedy the situation if you are caught in a cancel culture storm, right? And if you're not sure what they are, please go back to listening to the podcast, or please get in touch with us on linkedin.com/firstpagedigital, or even just messages, so that we can help you out here. But essentially these tips and tricks should be able to help you out through any cancel culture storm that you find yourself in. So I think that's it for us.
That's a good summary.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, usually writers are incapable of being concise and whatnot, but I think we managed to do it this time.
Yay.
I guess that's that. Sarah, is there anything you want to add before we conclude today's episode? Before we adjourn?
I don't think so. I think we have pretty much covered it very comprehensively. Mm-hmm. So hopefully it does help anyone who might want to learn a little bit more about cancel culture, just understanding why it happens.
Yeah, why it happens, why it's a good thing, why it's a bad thing, what they can do about it, right? I think we did that quite well today.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. All right. And I guess that's it, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Not Another Digital Marketing Podcast Singapore. My thanks to Sarah today for joining us in our ramshackle DIY amazing self-assembled studio.
Thanks for having
and
me.
Also big shout out to our content writers that have joined us today as well, Dana, and this week's director and episode producer, Vaish. So she's off camera right here, just giving us all side eye. So I guess it's all good. All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Peace out.